Hi, I'm Dan Curry, visual effects supervisor, producer on Star Trek, and today we have some of the greatest visual effects artists who have contributed to the show. Howard Anderson. Howard is credited for inventing the original Beeman effect on the original series, and his company was used for titles, opticals, and visual effects on numerous TV series and feature films. Rob Legato worked on Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, and after working on those, he won acclaim for such films as Apollo 13, Aviator, and won the Academy Award for Titanic. Ron Moore. Ron Moore worked on Next Generation, Star Trek Voyager, Star Trek Enterprise, and worked recently on Michael Mann's film Miami Vice, and is currently working on Rush Hour 3. As for myself, I was visual effects supervisor and visual effects producer on Star Trek The Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, Voyager, and Enterprise. Currently, I just finished a pilot for CBS Twilight. So let's talk about how visual effects were done in the beginning of Star Trek. Howard?
Oh, many years ago, you guys have come a long, long way from when we first started. We didn't have computer work there, and we were lucky to have some fiberglass plastics that we were able to use to build the first Enterprise.
So you developed the transporter. How did you go about that?
Oh, the transporter, that was one of several effects that we did develop for the show. And the transporter was, we tried a dozen things first. We finally ended up with silver flitters. And we had a focused beam of light straight down. And we just sprinkled flitters in the air, photographed it on black and white, high-speed black and white film at the time, and made a high contrast map from it.
Going about the effects in that way, did you have any trouble at all keeping up with the schedule?
We had 2 years lead on it, you know. So we did the first pilot in '62, and did enough work on it to get at least the show through. And then when they were going to do the second pilot, we had another full year to work on the pilot. So we worked on the Enterprise, every night at 6, after my brother had run the dailies with Roddenberry. He came back to the stage, and we shot Enterprise again, differently, added stuff to it, or whatever Gene Roddenberry considered would improve the look of it. Probably most proud of anything is the moving stars. The star background was a real wild thing to create. We did it on an optical printer. We had two frames of splattered black paint, black drops on a 4x5, 4x6 white card, and used a negative of that to put in the optical printer, and then reduced it and zoomed through each pass. It took us about 80 passes to cover the full frame.
Oh, Rob, you recreated the beam in for the pilot of TNG. How did you do that?
Well, first we had to discuss it to death, for one, because the thing that you designed became so well loved and such an icon of the show that now it has to the new one has to be reminiscent of it, but updated and better. And it's like, well, you're trying to live up to a legend, and even if you just duplicated it wholesale, it would never look right. And I remember I had to go to Gene Roddenberry's office for a meeting with Bob Justman, and we had to discuss it. And we went through, and I had a stack of tapes from every show. And Bob Justman would remember things so much more fondly than the real life
Bob was
thing.
marvelous.
So he would say, "Oh, it was so fantastic. It was in this show. This show was the best show." And I put the show in. I go, "Which one of these?" And he goes, "Oh, that wasn't a good one. That's when we used another company to do it. That wasn't good." So then we put in the next tape, and I could never get through any of the tapes because Gene and everybody else would reminisce about the guest stars on the show. Remember how beautiful this girl was, and remember that?
Oh, yeah.
And I was there for like 4 hours, and I never got one answer. So basically, I had to go off and make it up. And literally, we sort of updated it by having there's a wonderful animator, I know Mara Dutra, came up with a motion graphic approach to that. Basically, taking what you did, except updating it with now motion graphics that you can use instead of straight photography. And we basically did it the same way. We made it. It was on film. That became the template for everyone else. And I think Dan came up and updated for all the other shows, did all the other newer transporters, and it was sort of the inventive thing. Every time a Klingon had a transporter, somebody else who came up with
the alien transporters were really a lot of fun because each one had to have their own technique.
Yeah.
And once in a while, we would come up with one that was so strange that they wouldn't let us use it again. We did one where people came in cubes, and you did a corkscrew one for the Ferengi.
Oh, yeah.
That was pretty cool.
yes.
That was very novel at the time, I remember.
Well, you did one that was particularly cool where you took.
I patterned after pasta, basically, and I had to have corkscrew pasta that night, and that was the impulse.
Well, you did one I really liked. I think it was maybe the Cardassians, where you used coils of acetate and little lights beaming under it. That was very cool.
Yeah, I probably did it late at night, I'm sure.
Before when the series was just beginning to go, I got a phone call. I was at Cinema Research at the time from Peter Lauritsen, who had the idea that I would design 40 stock shots that would suffice for the entire series. So I did some storyboards, gave them in, and then I guess you and ILM endeavored to accomplish that, but it turned out that that was very optimistic. And we had to do 40
Way
shots for every
optimistic.
series.
Yeah, I mean,
For every episode.
the Enterprise, the pilot used the same 40 shots like 20 times, so they were all well used by the time we got to the first show. And every time I did a shot, it would kill them if I had to shoot a new shot. And they said, "Can we use it for a stock shot?" Sure. Next time the Enterprise gets hit with a baseball bat, because I did do one where it spins out of the. It's like, yeah, every time it gets hit by the same bat, I'm sure you can use that shot again.
I think GR10 was in every show.
Oh, you still remember the name? I forgot all those things. Yeah, let's do something different. Let's use that shot.
You know, I actually, that was in the feature, Generations.
Was it really? Oh,
Yeah, we
That's-
actually sent it out and had it
That's
redone on an
disheartening.
optical printer because it was shot VistaVision, but it was the pilot.
And we even
this
had-
was 7 years later.
Yeah, we even had names for specific explosions, like Sparky. was one of
Sparky,
them.
yeah.
Oh,
They were way optimistic with this whole finishing in post, digitally. So.
It was an adventure for me coming from optical printer land to starting to work in video, and it was like learning a new vocabulary. But it was an important change because it made the creation of shots very painterly, that you would work the shot until it was done, instead of just doing everything on an optical printer and sending it out to the lab for every tweak and losing another day. Talking about motion control, I made this little demo model this morning so we could talk about it.
Oh,
And
great.
If you're still
Rob-
working on the show, you probably would have used it.
yeah, probably. Rob and Ron and I had probably spent many, many hundreds of hours working with a rig like this. So this is
Bigger though.
a little bigger. And basically the rig works like this, slides forward and backwards, east-west, and north-south, so the camera can rise. So all illusion of motion comes from what the camera is doing relative to the model, rather than the model moving from its position. So we would only have to light one spot.
Yeah, we came up with this other way. It's remotely novel. Is we used ultraviolet light to actually light an orange screen or red screen, which generally people do blue or green, or we ended up using orange because it's faster. And we could just light it with fluorescent black lights, essentially. So blue light would spill on the ship, and only the orange light would be exposed there. So it made the matte process that much faster, because we wouldn't have to block all the light from hitting that or worry about the spill and stuff like that. So we ended up doing, we found sort of very fast innovations that were novel. People didn't really do it that way before.
Every time we shot it, it was 7 different passes to get the lights, the warp engines, and the various other things that we would need, beauty pass. So the camera would repeat 7 times.
We got the ship, and I was sort of remarking it had very little surface detail on, so it was really difficult to make it look like it came to life. And so I never knew what anything worked or what it meant or any of that stuff, still don't. And so these little red things on the front of the ship were there, and Andy Probert designed them that they only go on during, I guess it's in warp speed or something like that. So at any rate, it looked better with them on, so I left them on. So he apparently was very upset that in geosynchronous orbit, which I didn't understand what it meant, still don't, that the warp engines are on. It's like, well, why are they on? It's like, because it looks cooler with them on.
Those are the Broussard collectors.
Oh, really? See, I didn't know that. I still don't know that. And I will forget moments after this, by the way. And so I was responsible for actually destroying the science behind this.
Oh,
In all things, I was responsible for poking a hole in the science of Star Trek.
While we're talking about the motion control, we should talk about the 7th pass, the Star Pass.
So in order to do the star field efficiently, Gary Hutzel built a piece of milk plexiglass and painted the inside black, and with a push pin, one star at a time, scratched a hole in the paint. Then we would light it from the back, and the same pan tilt that would be used on the ship without the track move, we would stick the camera in here in the center of this and use that same pan tilt, and that would make sure that the stars properly locked to the move of the ship. Yeah, the main limitation with motion control is that there's a mount, and so you could only move the ship so far
Right.
before you'd see the mount. So, and then there were limitations of the track length and stuff like that.
With
So
And how close you could get in on something, you couldn't
yeah.
get that close because the model wouldn't hold up, or physically you can't get a camera in
Yes.
that tight.
So switching over to CG was a huge change, but it was one we went into kicking and screaming because computer animation when we started was not
Very
that
primitive.
It didn't look that convincing. The models looked better, but when the writers would give us an episode with 250 ships involved in a space battle, there was no way we could physically do
Yeah.
it with models anymore. Another big change was matte paintings, where originally we would do matte paintings in oils, and we worked with the great Sid Dutton, and I would do some of them, and we couldn't move the camera very much unless we rear projected the live action into the back of the matte painting. And then we started dabbling in electronic matte painting on paint systems. And we had to do a lot of shots lockdown, and Rob was using a technique shooting in CinemaScope so that in 4:3:3 aspect ratio, we could do a camera move within the C-scope so that we
Right.
shot the original material.
It was
One
basically, I took it
cut
off I took the idea off a pan and scan. I
Yeah, right,
watched,
sure,
I think
yeah.
one of the movies, and it was shot anamorphic or widescreen,
Yes,
and then
sure.
for TV, they would have to pan across it. And I
Yep.
was like, wow, I could steal
Yep.
that. So then I shot some of our stuff
Why not? Sure.
anamorphically so that we could then add a camera move on something that
Yeah.
otherwise we could not.
Yeah.
I think one of the biggest changes we had when we started, at least to me, was we no longer needed a negative. Up to that point, most television shows always had to have a negative so they could
back out, yeah.
run it out and film somewhere. Rob started before Next Generation, I think Twilight Zone,
Twilight Zone.
where they actually were making a show without a negative. I think Trek was just much bigger. But that allowed us to do so much. Had Paramount made the decision that we needed a negative, we'd have still been on the optical
Yeah,
printer.
oh, yeah.
Yeah, nothing would have
Every
really changed
Jets,
by
yeah.
then. Maybe
Yeah.
motion
It
control,
would have
but
been-
even
Yes.
then, we'd still would have to do maybe 30 shots a week
yeah, good
instead
point.
of 15, but not 115. That's for sure.
Yeah.
There was one particular show I remember. It was having during the writer's strike, and I can't remember the name of the writer now, but he was like the head writer, and he came up with this time continuum thing where the data split into 3 or 4 datas, and then one knows it has to hit something at the right. There was this, Star Trek, science, and it has to hit the plutonium in the thing at the right moment. And if it's a second off, everybody blows up, and they didn't, of course. But and the director of the show was completely befuddled by even the concept of that. He used to do Knots Landing, and he took me aside and said, like, I usually do like 2 people talking in a breakfast room. I have no idea when you're talking about time continuum. So what is it? It's like, well, it hasn't even really been written yet. And so we'll wait for these geniuses to come up with something. And that was right at the writer's strike, and that was the one scene that wasn't written. And we go to the stage, I got called to the stage and say, Rob is now going to describe the time continuum. It's like, I'm like, I don't know anything about it. This guy, I'm one notch up from the guy who does Knots Landing, but not much. And we had to go in. It was impressed me that we had to go in to the trailer. Remember, in the trailer, we had to go to the trailer and get the guy who was on the writer to describe in detail what the scene was really about. And he would preface everything, goes, if I was writing the show, but I'm not. And he literally was on a cell phone. I would have this, and I would say this, and we were writing it down on a napkin, and we broke for lunch, and I took the napkin stuff, and we went back on stage, and we actually just directed that scene based on this guy. And then I had to go off and shoot the 3 Brents.
One team. There appears to be 3 of us. Should I drop the antimatter or wait for one of you? Only one of us is in the correct time continuum. Which one? Me. It's me. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
My favorite fun explosion things was Dick Brownfield. Who would, it was you always knew when you hit like a Dick Brownfield special because there'd be maybe the box of explosives next to the ship that's going to blow up, and you'd say, Dick, the proximity explosions dangerous. No. I know what I'm doing. No, don't worry about it. And of course, you hit the go button, the thing, the spark, one spark, and you'd watch it in slow motion. Would spin around like a cartoon and go right in the box. The entire box would blow up. There'd be this long quiet, and you'd hear, God damn it. And then you knew you had a perfect Dick Brownfield moment because that's the comment that would come out. And every time, my other favorite one is one of those ones where you work on the show too long and you just get tired and punchy. It's, 2 in the morning or something, and it was a Borg fight, and Dick miswired all the Borgs. So when you pick up your gun and you go to shoot, then this thing would pop out of yours, and the actors didn't know exactly what to do. And then the other guy would fire, and then it would pop out of like his neck, and then you'd hear, God damn it! You'd stop what you're doing, and those are the great old days. I mean, he was a lovely guy, but he was. I always remember those particular.
Sense of humor?
Yes, well, we had one. I don't know about it. He was a little pissed at the time, but at least we got to go home early every time Dick was doing something. When you blow up the rest of the explosions for take 2, 3, 4, and 5, it's come back another day.
Yeah, and one of the head explosions from that show, we had packed.
If it was a head explosion, you were doing it. I'm sure it is.
We had
if
packed,
brains are coming out, then had your name written all over it.
we had packed raw meat into an old mold, and when the actors, we animated the skin peeling away, and Dick put such a huge charge in it that meat blew up into the permanent grid on top of the
still
stage.
there.
Still there, yeah.
Okay, so I remember the show, Cause and Effect. Who can forget that show? Not me. At any rate, I was so tired of every time we do an explosion, you'd be essentially a lock-off. There's no way around it. You couldn't do anything but that. And it was starting to get really kind of old, and this particular show had sort of Groundhog's Day where the ship would explode every, 10 minutes or something like that, and basically repeat the same act over again, but we want to show it in a slightly different way and more adventuresome way. And so we ended up doing motion control moves, and then at the same time doing the motion control, we do sort of get into real-time motion control and actually blow up the nacelles and the things coming out the side. And it actually was, at the time, it was pretty novel and different. It was, and everybody seemed to like it because it was literally, you never saw it on the show before because we never could do it before, until there was an advent of real-time motion control to do a ship pass. And then I think I even built a huge one to blow up. So actually physically the model blew up because always we'd super the explosion onto the model and nothing would really blow. That it got old after a while, so we actually built big pieces out of fiberglass and pack it full of explosions and have Dick Brownfield do another one of his specials on it.
That was just a pretty much shell that you did, right? And then right at the frame of the explosion.
Right at the frame of the explosion,
you
it would whip
cut the
around, and all of a sudden the thing would blow, and it looked like it was all done in motion. And a lot of it was, but the big huge blow happened at the end of a turn, so it felt like it was all. So that, and then now, of course, you don't have to do anything like that. Now you can do whatever you want and have.
You can, but still, I think the beauty of that was that it was always real. And a lot of times with the computer guys, it isn't. You know what I'm saying? If they use real elements and real things, then they can be very successful at it. But if they don't, then it's hard. But it's nice because we could blow something up, have the pieces. We could really blow up the actual model. And it didn't cost anything because you don't really blow it up.
Even now in this day and age, what I've been doing lately in my career post Star Trek is actually going back to shooting models and doing real explosions and forgetting the limitations of it, actually enjoying the limitation of it and making it look more realistic by the fact that it's a flesh and blood thing that accepts light a particular way in real life things. It looks kind of real. And you actually don't spend that much time screwing around with it. You don't art direct it to death. You just set it up and shoot it and move on. And all of a sudden it has a kind of sense of life that previously when I would do CG post Star Trek stuff would kind of get kind of stilted and overly art directed and So now I sort of went back to the kind of the days that you used to do things, where it's the only way you could do it is actually build it and then photograph it. Now I've started to do that again.
There's
But
a
isn't-
natural randomness about it.
There's a natural randomness, and it's the overstudy of something that I didn't like. Now, that being said, there's some great stuff that you can only do on a computer, that especially in spaceship shots and things like that, you do run into the limitation of motion control.
I think that's really important. I think having that model, it lets you walk around and look at it. Oh, I like the way it looks from here, or something like that. You actually, I think that helps. But I think the key points, what you just said, is the computer's good for its thing, and models are good for their thing. I think when we did Generations, the decision was made that we're going to take this negative and we're going to put everything, bring it into the computer, and we're going to do all the effects on the computer. And it's like, some of these shots really should go to an optical printer. It's $3 at that time, $3.50 a frame to put it into the computer, and then $3.50 a frame to get it out. Why don't we just go to an optical printer and do some of these shots that have been successful for how many years? And I did get a few of the shots.
It's interesting to see the evolution of visual effects. I remember when I was starting out with the original Buck Rogers and Battlestar Galactica, not the Buster Crab one, that we had about 85 people working 14 hours a day, 6 days a week to keep up with the work, and we did a lot less work and not as well as we were able to do on Star Trek because of switching into compositing in video, and ultimately the digital compositing made a huge difference. And look at some of the work that we're going. Where do you anticipate things are going to be going in the future?
I honestly, for me, I like now that you have both disciplines and now they should be in their proper place. Somebody coined a phrase that we were using the other day called digital fatigue or CG fatigue, which is having too much of that takes away some of the power. It's no longer something you haven't seen before. Basically, anything you can imagine could be seen. So much, too much so, sort of going away from cinema where you hide things for impact and then you show them at the very end. If you show, it's like showing the shark. The shark would be, Jaws would be a different movie if you had a CG shark. It just wouldn't be a classic. It would be another one of those films. So I'm seeing it that it's actually starting to put everything in its proper place. I now actually photograph more than I used to, sort of getting out of the CG craze and getting more into sort of real natural looking things and be able to photograph something and then just put it together very simply digitally opens up a whole nother world. So it's not all photography, it's not all digital or CG. There's a nice melding of the two, I think, that now becomes more about the filmic portion of it, not about the trick. I think we were so consumed years ago with whatever the next trick is, whether it's motion control or it's this, or now CG was the latest trick. Well, now it's back to sort of stories and what entertains you the most, and use whatever means necessary. Don't be impressed with the trick anymore. So I kind of feel that it's going that direction.
So true. Have you heard this song? I think you can even get it on iTunes now, called "Don't Need a Plot, We Got CGI." It's kind of a rap term, but I think that says a lot about what even the audiences today are seeing. I think they're getting tired of it. It's just too much, and I like seeing more of the art. If I didn't learn anything in Trek from you guys, it was the eye and the art, and I think what you're saying is so true. Photograph, do models. I know it was interesting in a show I'm working on now. That was a whole deal, was to build these big models and shoot them and everything, and time ran out because of indecisions and things, and now it's all going to be CGI. It'll be interesting to see. I hate to see those kind of compromises. It should be done the best way you can for the project, and story's king.
Well,
Thank you, gentlemen. It was
Thank
fun.
you. It's been a great
Gentlemen,
time.
Thank you.
Been a
Nice
an honor.
seeing you all again.
Brought back a lot of fond memories, I must say.
Thank you.
Howard,
Great pleasure. Good golly. Wonderful. Nice to see you all.
how do you want to leave it off today? Want to beam out? Q flash?
I was going to take my car. So yeah, I'm driving home conventionally this time.